Hello and welcome to day 26 of L2 Construction Series. Good morning, everyone. I'm your host, Hong Kit. Together with me is my host partner, Loon. Before we begin, I would like to take this opportunity to wish all Muslim friends, audience, Selamat Berpuasa. Today is the first day of Puasa. Though I'm not fasting, but I can understand Puasa this year is different, especially to those who are away from their families. However, everything will be okay. Stay positive. Puasa can guide you to stay strong and remain patient. Once again, we all in L2 Construction Series wish you Selamat Berpuasa dan kuatkan jiwa. So today we have a tax topic, and we are glad to have two guests to join us. They are Mr. Harriet Tan and Mr. Fook Cheong. Harriet is a partner of Harriet and Lam Partnership. He practices in the field of civil and commercial litigation, and one of his areas of practice is tax litigation. While Mr. Lee is an auditor and also the principal of FC Lee and Associates. We will start with Harriet giving his presentation and followed by Mr. Lee's presentation. After that, we will have our usual Q&A session. Harriet, are you there?
Yes, I'm good.
Harriet, can I ask you to introduce yourself to the audience before you proceed with your presentation?
Yes. Hi, audience. Hi, host. My name is Harold Tan. I'm a lawyer by profession. I'm a partner of Harriet and Lam Partnership. Well, I have been practicing in the field of civil and commercial litigation for the past 20-odd years. And one of my area of specialties is tax litigation. I've represented clients in resolving tax disputes, as well as represented them in appeal hearings before the special commissioners and the courts. So today we are talking about tax matters. People have asked, why tax? Well, I'm of opinion that, of course, we know that the COVID-19 situation has brought many financial challenges to all businesses in Malaysia, including the construction industry. And not to forget that the financial challenges is also faced by the Malaysian government. Well, with the pandemic in hand and also the unexpected drastic drop in oil revenue, it is a question to be asked is whether or not the budget deficit that the Malaysian government is facing would aggravate or increase tax collection efforts by the Malaysian government to shore up our national revenue. I certainly hope that it would not happen, but I also believe that this is inevitable. And it is in that context that I think that it is an opportune time for us to share some insights on the law and procedures governing in these areas of tax investigations and tax appeals. Next slide, please. Yes, I would like to begin by basically looking at some common offences that are provided under the Income Tax Act. And the first being the offence of filing of incorrect returns. As you can see on the slides, in the event that the Director General of Income Tax, DGI, decides that no prosecution is to be initiated against the defaulter taxpayer, the DGI is under the law allowed to impose on the tax defaulter a 100% penalty on such tax undercharge. But having said that, it is common practice, and this is very usual, for the Director General Income Tax to exercise his discretion to reduce such what we call penalties to 45%. However, in the event that the person is prosecuted in court for this offense, that the person upon conviction can be exposed to a fine of not more than 10,000 ringgit, as well as a 200% penalty on the tax undercharge. Next, please. Then we also have this offense of non-filing of tax returns. Under this section 112 offense, in the event of non-prosecution, the tax defaulter, as can be seen from the slides, can be exposed to a penalty of up to 300% of such tax undercharge, as well as an additional penalty, the sum of which is to be imposed by the DGI. And in the event of prosecution, this will depend on the number of years of assessments being defaulted. The tax defaulter, upon conviction, may then face a fine of up to 20,000 ringgit, imprisonment of not more than 6 months, and 300% penalty on the tax undercharge. Next, please. Okay, now we come to the offense of willful evasion of tax. Well, in the case of willful evasion, anyone who is found to have willfully evaded or assist others to evade tax, for example, by authorizing, preparing, maintaining false books of accounts, by giving false statements, as well, or making false entries in the return, can be prosecuted in court. And with the penalties of up to 20,000 ringgit fine, imprisonment of up to 3 years, and of course, a penalty of 300% of tax undercharge. But it's important to bear in mind that assistance, including advice for someone to evade tax, is included as an element of offense under this section 114. Next, please. And by way of the background, the 116 offense is related to obstructions by people, anyone, to obstruct officers of the tax authority in carrying out their duties. For example, in refusing to permit entry by the tax authorities to your building or premises during a tax raid, by refusing to provide and to submit books of accounts or records requested by the authorities during an audit or tax investigation, or refusing to provide answers to questions properly asked by the tax authorities in the course of carrying out duties, may expose you to the risk of prosecution that involves a fine as well as imprisonment of not more than 1 year. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now let's now talk, with that in mind, now let's talk about tax investigations. Well, the tax authorities had separated what they call tax audits and what the tax investigations, which I will describe and explain to them the differences in my following slides. But what we can tell that these investigations exercises shares these common objectives. Namely, they are exercises to enhance the voluntary compliance of the self-assessment tax reporting system of our country. And also it involves the examination of the taxpayers' books and records in order to determine if correct amount of tax is reported and paid by the respective taxpayers. Next, please. Tax audits comprises two types: desk audits and field audits. Desk audits are basically dealt with only by way of correspondence, and it involves straightforward cases with straightforward tax issues involved. But in the event that, for example, cases where desk audits are practically not possible because, for example, the taxpayers' documents to be reviewed are voluminous, the tax authorities may conduct field audits where examination of the books and records of taxpayers will take place at the taxpayer's premise. in this regard, in regard of field audits, prior notice will be given, and the notice period normally given is 14 days. Next, please. And in this slide, I've listed some of the information commonly required for audit purposes from contractors. I do not propose to go through it in detail because these slides, I understand, will be circulated to the audience. And why are these information required? Basically, these informations are the relevant information required by tax authorities for them to assess the correct or the proper tax obligations of contractors in each case. Next, please. And in this slide, I've set out certain commonly required information by audit officers from developers. Again, I would not go through them in detail, but do have a look at them when the slides are being distributed. Next, please. Okay, having described what tax audits are, then what are tax investigations? Tax investigations are also commonly known as dawn raids. Well, they are conducted certainly without any prior notice, and they are commonly conducted concurrently at multiple premises. For example, the taxpayer's business premise, the tax agent's office, and the shareholders or directors' homes, for example. It is also pertinent to note that the three offences that I have highlighted earlier, alluded to earlier in my presentation, the Section 112, Section 113, and Section 114 income tax offences are also listed as serious offences under the Anti-Money Laundering, Anti-Trafficking Financing Act, or commonly known as UMLATFA. With that, it comes with the powers of seizure and forfeiture, as well as the power of arrest without warrant, should the tax authority decides to carry out their tax investigation exercise in conjunction with their powers conferred on them by the UMLATFA Act. Next, please. So in summary, what we can see is that the powers of the tax officers in conducting audits and investigation or raids are very wide. This includes the power of access and search of any buildings or premises of a taxpayer. It includes the power to inspect, make copies, and take possession of documents. And this includes any electronically stored documents of the taxpayer as well. And of course, the power to call for information, including the power to interview the taxpayers and other relevant personnel, and also to call for productions of documents. Bear in mind that I've earlier alluded to the Section 116 offense of obstructions of officers in the carrying out of their duties is one that is punishable by fine as well as imprisonment. I would also like to point out that due to the MCO that is currently in place, the tax authority had recently come up with an announcement that any feedback to the tax authorities of information from tax audits and investigations have been extended automatically to 31st of May 2020. Of course, this did not take into account the fourth phase of the MCO that was announced yesterday, and we do expect that certain revisions to the deadline will be provided by the authorities in the near future. Next, please. So you may then ask, then what are the rights of the taxpayers in the case of a raid? Well, as a start, taxpayers, you will have the power to ascertain the identity of the tax officers involved in the raid exercise. and also to be informed of the scope and duration of the investigation. Well, certainly you are entitled to appoint legal representatives, both tax agents and lawyers for advice. And you are also entitled to make copies of your own documents that have been taken and in the possession of the tax officers in the raid. And very importantly, I must say that you have the power and the right to obtain a written acknowledgement of receipts of any documents that are taken, photocopied by the income tax officers during the raid. Next, please. So after the audit and tax investigation exercise, more often than not, that the tax authorities will raise an additional assessment on the taxpayer, requiring the taxpayer to pay more tax. Then what can you do about it? Firstly, any aggrieved taxpayer is legally entitled to lodge an appeal against the assessment raised. And this must be done in a prescribed form, commonly known as Form Q. This Form Q must be prepared and submitted to the tax office within 30 days upon the receipt of the assessment, giving reasons of the appeal as supported by sufficient particulars. It is to be noted that general statements, for example, those that are set out in the slides, that you are appealing against the tax assessments because you find that the tax has been wrongly imposed, the tax has been charged as excessive, without giving particulars of your objections, had time and again been rejected by the tax authorities, even at the time of lodgement of the Form Q. Next, please. So in the event that you have missed the deadline, the 30 days deadline to lodge the notice of appeal in Form Q, you can apply for an extension of time in the prescribed Form N. The application for EOT for this is to be first determined by the Director General of Income Tax. And if the extension of time is rejected by the DGI, then it is incumbent on the DGI to then forward your application for EOT to the Special Commissioners of Income Tax for their determination. All right. And in respect to the MCO, it is to be pointed out that the tax authority has also recently come up with an announcement that for any Form Q which due date falls within the MCO period shall be automatically extended to 31st of May 2020. And again, it is expected because of the fourth phase of the MCO, this deadline would be further extended to a later date in June. Next, please. Okay, when an appeal is filed, then the appeal, which I've described as a Form Q appeal, is to be reviewed firstly by the Director General of Income Tax. And he is duty bound under the Act to make a determination on the appeal within a period of 12 months. So during this period, the taxpayer is able to request for the setting up of what is commonly known as the Dispute Resolution Proceedings panel to hear out the taxpayer and the taxpayer's representatives. The DRP panel consists of the IRB tax officers not involved in the raising of the impugned assessment. Taxpayers are usually represented by lawyers or tax consultants during the DRP process. And the objectives of the DRP proceedings is to allow the taxpayer to present the taxpayer's case together with the supporting arguments and documents with a view to having the dispute settled amicably before the matter is being heard by the courts. Next, please. And if the Director General of Income Tax refuses or unable, or the parties are unable to come to any form of settlement of the tax appeal, then the DGI is duty bound to then send the appeal to be determined by the Special Commissioners of Income Tax, whose courts are situated somewhere in Putrajaya. Hearings before the Special Commissioners are conducted in a trial setting before three commissioners. While taxpayers are usually represented by lawyers during the hearing before the SCIT, anyone who is aggrieved or dissatisfied with the decision of the Special Commissioners can appeal against the decision to the High Court and later on to the Court of Appeal, but only on issues of law. Next, please. And finally, this is the very commonly known principle of pay first and you appeal later. Well, this basically means that when an assessment has been raised on you that the further tax is to be paid, you have to pay. You are obligated to make payment, even though you are appealing against the assessment. The Income Tax Act provides that civil court actions can be initiated by the government of Malaysia against the taxpayer to recover unpaid tax as a debt due to the government. And this is the case even if an appeal is still pending for review before the DGI or before determination by the SCIT courts. Appeal does not operate of the state. So, but in the event that the taxpayers is ultimately found to be to succeed in the appeal, then the option is for the tax paid to be refunded to the taxpayer, abate without interest. Right, next. Right, that's the with that I conclude my presentation, and I will take on questions later on in this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. We will now have our second guest, Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, can you give a brief introduction about yourself, and after that you can proceed, please?
Right, thank you, Hongkit. Good morning, everyone. As Hongkit said, I am a proof auditor, and I've been in practice for 20 years or more. And this morning, I've been invited by Harold Lam and Partnership to highlight some of the key tax measures announced so far in this trying time. Thank you very much. The next slide, please. So I'd like to highlight the first point is that taxpayers now has a special personal income tax relief for domestic traveling expenses. The taxpayer can claim up to 1,000 in year of assessment 2020 for domestic traveling expenses incurred between March and August year 2020. The expenses claimable will cover accommodation fees and entrance fees to tourist attraction centers. Now, currently, we cannot claim any traveling expenses at all. So for this purpose, to promote domestic tourism, the Lembaga Hasil Dalam Negeri has allowed this special income tax relief. Next, please. Next slide. Now this, because of the cash flow problem, companies are now allowed to make an early tax estimate revision in the third month of installment. So for example, companies with 31st December 2019 year end, the third month of installment will be in April. And in this month of April, they are allowed to make an early tax estimate revision. Now this one, you have to apply to the LGN by email, and the deadline to apply is up to end of May 2020. Now, having done the early tax revision, tax estimate revision, the companies are still allowed to make the usual tax estimate revision in the 6th and the 9th months of the basis period. Basically, for December year-end, companies will be in June and September. Next, please. Now, this one, the deferment of CP204, the tax estimate installment payments, it will be particularly useful for SME businesses. And this is only allowed for SME businesses, and it will be given automatically to SME businesses. Now, for these SME businesses, they have the option not to pay April, May, June of the tax estimate installment. Now, the deferred installments, they don't have to pay come July. If there's any tax to be paid later, it will pay after when you file your tax return. And there will be no tax penalty for non-payment of the 3 months, April, May, June. Next, please. Now, there is a special tax deduction for the donation for the crisis. Now, the donation can be made in cash and in kind to the Ministry of Health COVID-19 Fund. And also, cash contribution can be made to the COVID-19 Fund under the National Disaster Management Agency of the Prime Minister. Now, the donation of cash can also be made to approved organizations. For cash donation, there is no need to apply for approval to claim for the tax deduction. However, for donation or contribution in kind, the taxpayer has to apply for the prior approval from the Ministry of Finance. Next, please. Next slide, please. Okay, there's a special tax deduction for renovation and refurbishment incurred in between March and December year 2020, and is deductible up to 300,000. Sorry, and this one, once you have deducted against your profits, it shall not apply for capital allowances. Next, please. Tax deduction for waiver or discount on rental. This waiver is available for landlords of buildings and business premises given rental discount at least 30% to SME tenants. Now, please note that there must be at least 30% rental discount for SME tenants. The claims later can be made against your income. Next, please. For companies that provide PPE, the personal protection equipment, for example, face masks, they are allowed to deduct the expenses. This for disposable items. For those non-disposable items, they can claim capital allowances in their normal tax returns. Next, please. Now we come to the extension of deadlines. For Form C, companies with financial year ending 31st July 2019 to 31st December 2019, they have up to 9 months to lodge their tax returns. Form E, for the employer, the extension is 31st May 2020. And Form BE, staff with salaries who have to file their tax return will be extended to 30th June 2020. For individuals who are carrying on businesses who are filing Form B, their deadline will be extended to 31st August 2020. Non-residents will have 2 deadlines depending on whether they are carrying on a business, or not carrying on business. For those carrying on business, the deadline will be 31st August 2020. And for those not carrying on business, the deadline will be extended to 30th June 2020. Next, please. Now, for those non-SMEs, their CP204 tax estimate, they have to pay by 30th May 2020. Any CP204 estimate that you need to submit within this MCO period was also extended to 31st May. For companies that have to submit the monthly tax deduction or the PAYE, now they can do it up to 31st May 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Lee. We will start our Q&A section now. I will start with Harriet. Harriet. So a tax investigation is not only disruptive to a business, but it can be scary or even intimidating. What should a business owner do when faced with tax investigation? What was your advice to the owner?
Response to the questions, I think the most direct and effective measures that the business owner can take when facing with such exercise of course to maintain proper sets of records and to ensure that the tax accounting and the reporting are done properly. And the next thing is, of course, in this regard, I'm of the opinion that seeking assistance and advice from qualified and experienced tax consultants to assist business owners to prepare and maintain the tax records would certainly be helpful. And furthermore, I think care must be taken by business owners to ensure that their documents, records, and books of accounts, both in hard copies and those stored electronically, are complete, secure, and are kept in a manner that can efficiently be retrieved when required to do so by the authorities, for example, in the case of an audit or a tax investigation. For the information of the audience, for tax purposes, all records of companies or businesses, for the matter, that are relevant to the assessment of business income is required to be maintained for a period of 7 years, right? So I'm of the view that if your accounting records is kept properly, that your reports, tax returns are filed in order, and your documents are secure, complete, then there should not be any cause of concern to business owners when facing with such rates or audit exercises. Then if you are, well, in one fine day, a tax authorities comes to your office and says that you are under rate. So what should you do? Well, as the first, you should ask and to identify and ascertain the identity of those officers. Inquire from them the scope and purpose and duration of the investigation, and at the same time, contact your tax consultants and lawyers for assistance. Well, in the case of the interview and taking a recording of statements, lawyers can be allowed to be present when such statements are being taken. It is very important that advice and assistance be called for at the very first instance to ensure that the taxpayers' rights are protected, and also that the investigation procedures are conducted in a fair and orderly manner. And
yes,
also,
I agree with you. I think professional representation is very important when dealing with the tax inspectors, right?
Yes.
At this stage. Yeah. Okay, Harriet, is a general perception that contesting the decision of the tax authority is an uphill battle, very difficult. Can you share with us some successful appeal cases based on your experience, and what are the key points learned from these cases?
Well, I think I will share with you the audience one example that in this particular case, I acted for a cement manufacturer who was faced with an additional assessment raised after a field audit exercise. The tax authorities took the position that the taxpayer has overclaimed tax deductions and underdeclared assessable income. Right? I was brought in to advise the client during the stage of after the audit, but before the assessment was raised. So it's very important that the legal advice be sought for at the very first instance, because when that is done and the legal rights and the correctness and the merits of the assessments can be ascertained at the very initial stage of the assessment, then negotiations can already be kick-started with the audit team, in this case the audit team, to see whether the parties can reach an amicable settlement. In my case, unfortunately, the audit team was unwilling to settle the matter, and therefore the assessments was raised. I then proceeded to assist the taxpayer to prepare the notice of appeal in Form Q, and also attended to various meetings with the DRP panels that I've explained earlier, in which in such proceedings, we presented the taxpayers' arguments and the merits of our case, supported by documents. But unfortunately, also we were unable to come to an agreement through that process. And thereafter, the appeal was then forwarded to be determined by the Special Commissioners of Income Tax. Well, in the Commissioners' Courts, well, of course, trial preparations have all been prepared. And at that stage, I was then communicating with a different set of tax officers. And this time it is the litigation team of the tax office, well, whom I believe are more willing to consider the tax appeals based purely on merits. Because these tax litigation officers are the one ultimately who's going to argue the appeal before the commissioners. So in this particular instance, example, we were fortunate enough to be able to persuade the litigation team to accept the points of our appeal, the consequences of which is that the appeal was subsequently settled with a settlement agreement being entered, and the appeal being allowed by consent. So that is one example of the various stages of the tax litigation process that this particular matter went through with good results. Thank you, Hongkit.
Thank you, Harold. Just one last question. We know that the owners for sole providers and partnerships are personally liable for debts of their businesses, and this would include tax debts. What about companies? Shareholders or directors of the company would be personally liable for the tax debts?
Yeah. This is a very common question that I've been asked. The answer is this: shareholders and directors can be personally liable jointly and severally with the company for its tax debts, provided of two criteria are fulfilled. The first is that the person must be a director of the company. All right. And secondly, that person owns directly or through his associates owns 20% or more shares in the company. So by giving an example, and for example, in the company, a director husband owns 10% shares of the company. Without more, he is not personally liable for the tax debts of the company. But let's say his wife, who is defined in the Income Tax Act as an associate of his, owns a further 10%. So in such case, he is deemed to own 20% shares in the company, and by virtue of him being a director as well, he is personally liable for the income tax debts of the company in the relevant years that he meets those two criteria. So be very careful, ladies and gentlemen, of this provisions of the law. Thank you.
Okay. Interesting to know that, Harold. That's all from me. I'll pass the mic to Wai Loon now.
Thank you, Hongkit. I have a question for Mr. Lee. Now, Mr. Lee, I was asked to put this question to you by the audience. Now, this is regarding the 30% rental discount to SME businesses that you talked about, Mr. Lee.
Yeah.
Now, the first question to that issue is that, is it also apply to personal income tax where the property belongs to a person in his personal capacity, but rented to an SME business?
Yes, any taxpayers who owns a business premises renting to SME tenants are eligible to claim for tax deductions. Now, the taxpayer can be a company, can be individuals, can be cooperative, can even be a sole proprietorship or partnership, so long as their business premises are rented out to SME tenants.
Yeah. Mr. Lee, there are also, you know, the SMEs, right? Very common where when they rent the property, they use their personal name. And then after that, the running of the premises is by SME. So on documents, there is actually no rental agreement to an SME, but to the owner of the SME. Would that also be eligible?
Right. Now they have specified some supporting documents to be kept. If I run through the supporting documents to be kept, you will see that those who are having no proper documents will be may have difficulty. Now, one of the supporting documents that they need to show is the official tenancy agreement, rental income statement, and certification of reduced rental, and certification of SME status of the tenant. Now, all the documents should be available except for one of them, which is certification of SME status. Now, this can pose a practical problem, how to certify the tenant is SME. So far, we haven't gotten more details on how to certify. But one of the conditions is that there must be a certification of SME status of the tenant. And you must have an original tenant agreement to show what was the original rental and how much you are charging now. That means how much is the reduction now.
I see. Now, also relating to this 30% rental discount, would the failure to provide the minimum 30% rental discount for a particular month, let's say this month I don't give you the 30%, but in the subsequent 2 months I decide to give the 30% discount, would the owner still be entitled to this tax deduction?
Yes, this special thing is given on a month-to-month basis, which means that if you have not decided on the first month to give a 30% discount and you decide to give a 30% or more in the second month and the third month, you qualify for the reduction in respect of the second and the third month of rental.
I see. All right. How about the payment of deferred tax installments for SMEs? Is there a need for SMEs to pay the deferred tax installment payments after the MCO?
No, there's no requirement to pay the outstanding month of tax estimate for due in April, May, June. There's no requirement to pay the backlog, so to speak. So you can continue to pay the July tax installment according to your schedule.
Oh, what you are saying is that that means the original scheduled payments.
It's like a holiday tax payment for April, May, June. Then July you will continue your normal schedule, because any balance of tax to be paid because you have short paid for the 3 months can be paid later when you submit your income tax return.
I see. All right. So you can actually pay at the end.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. My last question to you, is there any extension of time for submission of financial statements by companies to SSM? I heard about there are some extension given.
Yes, yes. For public company which needs to hold their AGM within 6 months of the financial year end, they'll be given extension for 3 months from the date of the AGM is supposed to be held. And this applies to companies with financial year ending 30th September 2019 until 31st December 2019. Now, when it comes to lodgement of audited financial statement with SSM, the private companies have also been given an extended deadline of 30 days after 3 months from the lodgement date. Also for companies with financial year ending 30th September 2019 until 31st December 2019. Now this exemption, companies have to specifically apply to SSM using the relevant forms to get the exemption, because they don't want companies to abuse the exemption privilege.
All right. Well, I have another question regarding the rental tax deduction of 30%, which is the applicable benefits by the government. Does it only apply during the MCO period, or does it apply for a specific period only? Is it for 3 months or for longer than 3 months?
At the moment, they will announce it's only for rental reduction for the 3 months only, for that particular 3 months. There's no further announcement. We have to wait for any further announcement.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lee. I think we have overrun the session already. So then, I just want to ask whether Harold and Mr. Lee has any concluding remarks to make to the audience today.
Well, I just would like to take this opportunity to wish all our Muslim audience Selamat Berpuasa, and to all of us who are facing the challenges posed by the pandemic. Stay courageous, continue to fight this fight, stay positive, and stay safe. Thank you.
Well, nothing more to add other than stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, over to you, Hong Kit.
Okay, thanks, Wai Loon. Thank you, Harold and Mr. Lee. I hope you all get some useful information for your company's tax planning today. So as you can see on the screen, tomorrow we will have Ronan Collins returning to L2 Construction Series. This time not as the president of Lighthouse Club, but the head of project information management of Gamuda, to share with us the adoption of some latest construction technologies such as BIM, drones, and cloud platforms in post-COVID-19 construction works. Ronan tells me that his focus tomorrow is not on the top technologies per se, but instead the human that are implementing these technologies. Ronan will share with us about a small group of plant engineers who develop autonomous tunneling machines, and how surveyors became drone pilots and found new ways to use BIM for site surveying and progressing monitoring. Do join us tomorrow to listen more. I also would like to remind you that again that you can find all our previous sections on our YouTube. So far, the videos for day 1 to day 18 have already been uploaded. Please subscribe to our channel to get all the latest updates. Also, please continue to leave us feedback if you have any comments. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, everyone, and take care. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you, Harold. Thank you, Wai Loon. See you all.
Thank you all.